All right. Well, this is really episode 2 here, and today we've got my dad, Bob Lindeman, and my son, Jesse Lindeman. We've also got Lon Schluter, which is a good friend and a salesman of ours. Um, Dad's going to tell us some more stories here, so we'll just let him kind of start talking here, I guess.
Okay, I thought I'd tell you a little bit how Lindeman Tractor come to be. It was started by my father, and to understand how he come about to do it, I need to kind of tell his early history. He was he was the 10th of 10 children, and his mother died when he was about 1 year old. So they lived on a farm down southeast of Lyman, Iowa, and so the aunts and the older sister kind of took care of my dad, and my grandpa married a lady, and the family liked him real well. She took care of him, but then she got sick and passed away. So then a couple years later, my grandpa married another lady that they didn't care for at all, and she had 2 girls, and they didn't get along with these girls. These boys didn't, and so anyway, she finally left and went back to Des Moines, where she'd come from, and so my grandpa had a sale when my dad was 8. And then he went to Vancouver, British Columbia, with an older daughter that lived out there. And so he took my dad to his oldest sister, Aunt Mary, we called her. She was Mary McFadden, and gave her $2, or I gave her $1, and said, buy him a pair of overalls and send him to school.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and my dad never saw his dad again until he was 15 years old.
Wow.
So, and Aunt Mary she was a saint of a person, and took good care of Dad, and he always knew he was welcome. But they had a little boy and a girl at the time, and then soon they had another baby. And so Dad being 8, and he just really felt like that they had a small house and all that. He just felt like that he needed to try to pull his own way some way.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did go to school, but he only really got through the 8th grade because come spring, if anybody would hire him, like they did a lot those days around the country, why they'd hire him.
Now, that probably wasn't that I mean, that was kind of normal, wasn't it, for kids not to really go to that much
yeah,
school?
the boys generally would have to
needed on the farm
need on the farm, but
yeah.
So he started that out though. When he was 8, he could do a whole lot.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, he started. They told about that. He kept record of what he'd made and all that, and tried to save up his money, and tried to help out with McFadden's whatever he could, and so that went on, and until when he was out of school, why he pretty much began to get farm jobs because there was a lot of demand for labor, all kinds of stuff. There were no manure loaders or anything like that. Everybody had to pitch and
a lot of manual labor.
Yeah, so all kinds of scooping and everything. So
Yep.
so he grew up with all that, taking care of animals, and so then when he got to be 21, well, in the meantime, then there was a school teacher who was my mom that came and taught a school not too far by, and so she came to the same church he did, and so he soon got to asking her to take her home, this, that, and the other, and one thing he told about when he took her home where she lived, it was up by Cumberland, so it was quite a ways. And so in the wintertime, you take her up there in a buggy, and so whenever it was, 10, 11 o'clock when he was coming home, it's, take an hour or two to get home. But the horse would know how to go home, and so he just cover up with a big old blanket and sleep, and the horses take him home. And that was pretty handy. That's better than a car will do.
Yeah.
And so the only thing was that the other guys would do that too. And if you have to meet a horse pulling a buggy, they would pass one another in the dark, but they wouldn't necessarily leave room for the buggy wheels. So all of a sudden, it wasn't unusual to lock up with some other guy going the other way.
Yeah.
Have to get untangled, get wake you up that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, they got married, and let's see, right at the 1st of March of 1914, and my dad had what money he had. He'd bought a car, but then he knew he had to have something to farm with, so he somehow traded that for a good team of horses and some other stuff. And so, but he somehow rented a 240-acre farm. Well, that's an awful lot of land to farm with
horses.
With horses.
Yeah.
And so then when he got that rented by his older brother, Cal Lindeman, which was 6 years older than he, but they were always about the same size and were always good friends. He and his wife went in partnership with him, and they lived in the same house. And my dad and mom in one half of the house, and it was a fair-sized house, I guess. So they got along pretty good, but it was a lot of work with Uncle Cal had a team too, and so they put in their crop. But he began to hear about tractors, and so he and Uncle Cal went to some convention. I think maybe I talked on that before.
Yeah, you did. That's where they came up with the Emerson, wasn't
They come up with this Emerson tractor.
Yeah.
Well, it was not really successful because it had this one wheel in the back. There was a wide wheel and then two other front ones. And when it get on a side hill and get to pulling something, it would the upper wheel would raise up in the air, and the wheel would just dig a little hole to the ground. So anyway, the company realized that made them, but they had come up with something better. I think it was a Mogul or something like that. At that time, there were a lot of small manufacturers of tractors who were just starting up on them, whatever, and no big company, but there was a whole variety of these tractors. Well, this was about 1915 when Dad had that. So he got this Mogul, and he sold a couple of those. And the deal was he could farm with them and demonstrate them to the customers and sell them to neighbors and whatever. So he had sold a couple. Well, then these small companies got to selling their equipment to what was called a distributor that would buy their machines, and they themselves would get the dealers. And so Dad then got hooked up with a distributor. Well, then they had different kinds of machinery, and they would handle some make, and then maybe if that got pretty successful, they would break off and go on their own. And so one of the companies that they had that Dad about 1919 or so sold was a Waterloo Boy, and he sold 2 or 3 of them, but then John Deere bought them out, so
Right.
that was the
Right.
starter of the John Deere company.
Right.
So then the next thing that came along was the Hart Par tractor. and that company was made in Charles City, Iowa, and it's credited with the first successful gasoline farm tractor. In fact, I saw one in Washington, D.C., and that institute, whatever they call it.
Smithsonian.
Yeah. And so, anyway, the Hart Par was pretty successful, or real successful, I guess you'd say. And they had several different models. Well, first they just had the one, but then they branched out and had like a 20, they called it 1224 or 13 or 1836 and a 2850. And so they had a pretty good size. However, that biggest one was only 50 horse, which is not a whole lot more than our garden tractors now. But anyway,
So can I interrupt for a second? Where did that Silver King?
well,
come into
I'm
the
getting to
picture?
that. Dad sold these Hart Pars, and one thing I'd tell you about there, he sold one to fairly near neighbor, a new 1224. And so the guy wasn't very mechanical, but anyway, he in the winter it was common to drain your radiators, and they never used antifreeze, whatever, but you just drain. And most generally, you never used a tractor in the winter anyway. So this guy called Dad up in the spring after he'd had it about a year, and it said, "There's something wrong with this tractor. I can't get it started." So Dad went up there and he turned it over and didn't have any compression. Well, then he looked over a little bit and hid, and the block was all cracked.
Oh, man.
And he says, the guy's name was Harvey. He says, "Well, Harvey, didn't you drain this?" "Yeah, I drained it." He says, "The plug's right up there on the shelf in the shop." And so he said, "Here." So he went to get it. In the meantime, Dad went down and looked, and the drain plug was in it. And so he came back, and Dad says, "Here's your drain plug."
So what had he taken out?
Well, so then
Probably.
he says, "Well, I sure drained it. Oh, I remember I used it to saw wood in the wintertime, and I forgot to drain." Well, in the meantime, though, when he first was over there trying to start it, the wife came out, and she was complaining, says, "This tractor never was right," she said.
Yeah.
And she was on him all the way. And so when she saw about the drain plug, she turned on her heel and went back to the house.
Didn't have much to say then.
No, she didn't have much to say. So anyway, that run up to the later 20s. And about the time I was born in 1927. Of course, I didn't remember anything for about the first 3 years.
Yeah.
But when I do remember, the Hart Par had been replaced by Oliver tractor. And the big deal there was that they had a cultivating tractor. McCormick Deering, which was international, had come out with a cultivating tractor in 1923. And up to that time, all they could do is cultivate with horses, cultivate the corn, you know. So anyway, this was a pretty decent deal. It was called Oliver Standard, and it had big steel wheels at the back and a single front wheel, which was kind of concave shape. It was a heavy wheel, but looked kind of like a rim of a tractor without a tire on it. But anyway, Dad sold, I think, 35 of those. He demonstrated them, whatever.
Wow.
And so they were popular and good working outfit. But of course, there was, as compared to a tractor today, all it had was a hand crank and a magneto, and no hydraulic system, no starter, no nothing, old iron seat, and just as crude as it could be.
Yeah.
And but anyway, then the Depression hit real bad, and a lot of these guys they had bought them on time through Oliver or some kind of a finance. Well, hardly any of the guys or a good percentage of them anyway, that had them financed, couldn't pay for them, and Oliver went and took them back, repossessed them, and Dad sold them to his friends and his neighbors and all that, and he tried his best to talk them into giving them some time. They'll be able to pay, but he took them back. Well, because of Dad threw up his hands on that. I don't want any more to do with Oliver. And so then the first tractors I remember were Ellis Chalmers, and that was in 1930, and I was just old enough to remember. But one spring there we had about, I think, at least 6 or 8, or it seemed like a whole bunch of them that they'd shipped in there, but they were supposed to be a cultivating tractor, but they were 4-wheeled. Well, I come to find out, and Dad sold, he sold, I think, probably most of the ones he had there. And because I remember some of the neighbors still had those. But anyhow, it turned out that they didn't have a cultivator for that tractor, but they came out with a row crop the next year or two. Well, and then Ellis Chalmers went direct, so Dad didn't have access to it anymore. But this company was called Porturan Farm Equipment in Des Moines, and Dad was real good friends with them, and I used to go in with him some, and I was just a kid, and they'd treat me real well too. Dad was talking to him,
Right.
and I'd go out in their sheds and look at the machines they had, but they're the ones that come up with the Silver King tractor, and that was a rubber-tired outfit, and it was made in Plymouth, Ohio, and they had originally going to call it a Plymouth, and did, but the Plymouth Chrysler company complained, and so they had to come up with a different name. They called it the Silver King.
What do you know?
And anyway,
so that's of course the tractor that you lost your thumb.
well, the first ones we got, they were all rubber tired, and so Dad demonstrated them and against a lot of steel wheel tractors. And I remember he said he went one place to demonstrate with a guy that had a 1020 International. That's a steel-wheeled 4-wheel tractor, pulled a 2-bottom plow. And Dad, they plowed around. They didn't contour then. They plowed around up a hill and whatever. And so this 1020 had trouble going up that hill. He'd get to spinning. And so Dad hooked on that plow, and he went right up and around there with that Silver King. And so then they sat and talked, wondered, well, how come he could do that? Well, Dad says that because your tractor takes so much of itself to pull it. Yeah. Well, they didn't think so, and he says, well, all right, let's test it out. So they put a chain on this 1020 and hooked it onto the Silver King and went around up that same place. When he got up the middle of the hill, the Silver King started to spin, pulling that tractor just dead. So the tractor was taking a lot of its energy to just pull the tractor.
Right.
And the rubber tires and whatever. And so I remember that tractor, and so that was about 34, and 1934, and that was a real dry year. It was a tough year, but he sold quite a number of them, and but then finally in 1939 they come out with a tractor with a starter on it, and it was a little bit bigger, and it was a little neater tractor, whatever, improved some, looked a little better, and so we got one in, and that's the one that I got my thumb taken off of in the spring of 1939.
Can we, we were talking in the first episode, about Ross Porter and him grabbing this pulley and kind of giving you the idea of maybe grabbing a hold of this PTO and and of course, you losing your thumb and how that kind of shaped the future, not only maybe the success of the business, but meeting Mom. Can you explain that day and losing your thumb?
Yeah,
Would that
well,
be
I
a good
don't
time to
know
do?
whether I told this before or not,
Well,
but
no, not in that episode. So,
anyway, I was, my dad had it was on well, on a Friday night, Friday afternoon, I saw my dad go by the schoolhouse, which was a mile and a half away from where we lived, in our old Ford pickup, old kind of a beater. And so he got back late that night, and he had traded for a newer, not a brand new, but international pickup. And so we was all excited, and so next morning, Saturday, I was going to go to Atlantic, and the deal, they're supposed to put sideboards on the box. And so
that's what it was. Sideboards.
so Dad and my sister Rose, she needed shoes or something, and I were going to go to town in that pickup and get that done. So, but just we getting about ready to go, a neighbor called up and wanted to know what happened to go to Atlantic. Dad said, "Oh yeah, we're going," and he said, "Well, I gotta go with you." Well, yeah. So when he come down here, he had his son Junior with him. So we were going to go four in a cab, which wasn't too big, but now Junior's here. So guess who got left out? Old Bob, he got left out.
You were pretty disappointed, weren't you?
I was disappointed as heck.
I bet.
And so it was a boring day, and so I don't know what I did in the morning, but in the afternoon I messed around and I went out and that new the new
Silver
John
King.
Deere, that new Silver King was in the shed, and so I started it up, hit the starter.
Now you're about 11 years old, is that right?
about 11 years old.
Yeah.
And so I started up and I got off of it and sat there running. And the power taker was running kind of slow there, and so I had big heavy mittens on, leather mittens, and like a dumb idiot, I took a hold of that with my right hand and started to squeeze on a
thought
little
you could
bit,
kind of
like I was going to do like Ross did.
pull the engine down.
Well, it just immediately my mitten flew off, thank God, and and I looked down at my hand. Well, here my thumb was all broken off and hanging there, and so it had pulled off of my hand, thankfully, but my thumb had done that deal, and so it just zipped it right off.
Wow.
So anyhow,
Shows your
that's the
hand.
story.
Show us your hand.
Yeah, hold up
Hold
your
your
hand
hand.
there, Dad.
Oh yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it never grew back. And but I got a little bit of story about that too. When I got to be 18 and 12th of March, they were all of a sudden they were calling for draftees for World War II, and they were wanting replacements as they were trying to finish up the war, apparently, whatever. So anybody that got to be 18 over in our area there, and some other guys that they hadn't called before for some reason or other. Anyhow, they called me up to go for a physical, and so I went on the railroad to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, for this pre-adolescent physical with about 30 guys, about three of us from my class, and we kind of bummed together all the way there and down, and that took us till midnight to get there. Well, anyway, when after I went through my physical, all my papers, I looked at them and had red marks that said 4F, which would mean you wouldn't take me, and had right thumb missing. So I, of course, goes home, and I didn't go to service. But my dad was just starting the business. He had moved. The company told him that they were going to put a dealer in Atlantic if he because he was on the farm just selling what he was selling a Ford tractor at that time. And so he was starting the business, and it was just he alone, and me. I would was helping him deliver and get him ready and all that stuff. In fact, I missed quite a bit of school because I was doing that. And we were also farming at the time. And so if I'd gone to the service, it's pretty well, I mean, I'd guess that he probably wouldn't have gotten started at Atlantic for a business.
Right.
Well, then another thing, the girl that I always had my mind on and lived not too far away. In fact, we played together in a playhouse when we were about 4 years old, made mud pies. And but she was an outgoing gal, and she didn't have any brothers and sisters, and she always told her mom when she was little, she said, "I want to go somewhere where they got lots of kids." And so I was pretty bashful and stuff. One time when we were about 8 years old or so, we used to go over to Lewis Lake, and they had a swimming pool that
Yeah, Lewis Lake used to really be quite the place.
yeah, it was. It was a real
Nothing
vacation
like it is
place.
now. Yeah.
Well, one 4th of July, we went over there, and so you had to go to the boating house and rent a bathing suit, unless you had your own, and pay them a dime or 15 cents or something. So anyhow, Mom had to let me put on my bathing suit, which was a thing that come over your shoulders and whatever. Had a couple of holes in the side, whatever. And so put them on underneath my clothes so that when I got over there, I could just pull them off and get in the swimming pool. Well, I had planned to do that, but I got over there. Here was that girl, my Norma Jean was in there. And for some reason, I was too bashful because she was in there. I didn't get in, so I spent the whole afternoon with that darn bathing suit on. It was about like having underwear on.
Probably hotter now.
That's how dumb
Yeah.
I was. Reminds me of another story.
Girls will do that to you.
Well, when I got to the 7th grade, Mom made arrangements so I could take junior high here in Atlantic, and so and in our homeroom we stayed with the whole class. There were about 30 kids in this class, and so I, being a L, started right up in the right-hand corner, up by the teacher, over by the door, and in the very back, diagonal across in the rear of the other side of the building, in the rear, was a real pretty little red-headed girl, and she dressed real nice, and I thought she was cute. I really kind of had a crush on her, and I always had my eye on her, but I never ever talked to her. Well, she moved away then during for the rest of the school year. So
we're getting real close on time.
all right,
here.
I'll finish up. And so she moved away, but we had a class reunion, and after about 30 or so years, or 35, or I don't know, whatever, we had a reunion every 5 years. She came to it, and so I went and talked to her, and I told her about this, and I says, I never talked to you. She said, "Well, why didn't you?" I guess I was too dumb.
Yeah. Hey, let's just take a little break here for a minute. Let me check this camera here.
All right.
Okay, we're back here, and Dad, I think he's got something he was wanting to continue with here. So.
Well, I kind of got off the track what I really wanted to tell you about a little bit. But getting back to my dad in about the early 1930s, when we got Silver King Tractor, that company, Port Huron, would let Dad take a new tractor, and if he'd sell one, he'd go get another one, and it was on consignment. He did have to pay for it. In fact, he couldn't pay for it, but they allowed him to use it. and demonstrate it, and then he'd sell it, and that's the way it worked, and so that's really how he could stay in the farm equipment business. I don't know what he made on them, not a whole lot, as far as that's concerned, but at in the height of the Depression, things got so bad that there really wasn't hardly any money available, whatever, and so but that relationship they had with Port Huron was what tidied him through and helped him get to be a Ford tractor dealer, and so I guess maybe I'll tell you how that happened. And
Hang on here just a minute. So, of course, we're talking about Depression times here, right? Okay, so that story about the landlord coming
okay, I'll tell that.
And you, of course, had this goat or wanted a goat.
Okay,
Can you tell that story?
I'll tell that
I've always thought that was kind of a
I'll tell it. Okay.
cute story. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Go ahead.
So back in those Depression years, my dad had bought the farm we lived on in 1919. He bought it for $200 an acre, and so he had it half paid for. But the Depression, hogs got down to be about 5 cents, and corn 10 cents, and he couldn't make the payments on the farm, and neither could a whole lot of neighbors as far as that. Anyhow, he lost the farm, and so but we rented it from the insurance company that took it over. It was Metropolitan Life Insurance, and so they'd send an agent out every so often to inspect things, and in fact they put out money for fixing up the place quite a bit, and some fencing and stuff, and it really worked out pretty good. Dad said he was better off that way than he had been before on by having to pay on the farm. But anyway, so this agent would come every once in a while, and the folks told us that we should keep the yard clean and everything picked up and keep everything neat.
I'm guessing that that was a little bit nerve-wracking or something when he came around, or no?
Well, it was because
put you on edge a little
it
bit.
was whatever. He seemed like he was king, and so. But anyway, in the meantime, I wanted a pet goat, and of course my folks didn't want me to have any goat, but I was pretty persuasive, I guess. I kept begging for a goat, and finally a guy not too long ago, or far away, I had a goat. So we got this goat, and so we were going to country school one day, and so this inspector came, and so he and Dad.
Didn't he have like a brand new car?
Yeah, okay. He
came pulling in a
was
brand
in
new
depression.
car.
He come in a brand new car, which nobody even hardly saw around anywhere. So he drives in with a new shiny car and parks it out by the gate and of the house. And so he and Dad went down among the buildings. They're talking, doing something or whatever. When they come back up in Sightway, guess what? That goat was standing right on top of that brand new car. And so
that went over real well.
Pretty embarrassing to my dad, but anyhow, we didn't have to move. So,
that's pretty good.
So that's a story about the goat. And
did that worry you? Did that worry you? Were you worried that maybe that would?
Well, yeah. My sisters and I. Because the folks had talked about moving. In fact, this Port Huron company wanted a field sales manager, and they approached my dad to hire him for that area, and so they talked about moving to Atlantic, and us kids didn't want to do that at all. We liked it on the farm, and so but they considered it. In fact, my mom owned a house on Olive Street, which her mom had lived in and had gone to California, and Mom somehow or another inherited or bought it or some way. I don't know how she could have, but anyhow, she had this little house, so they considered moving there. It's still down there on Olive Street and about between 3rd and 4th Street.
Oh.
I always look at it every time I go by there. But anyway, we never did. We stayed there until, well, actually 1941, my dad bought it back for $100 an acre. So, so anyway, but I'll go ahead and tell about the Ford then.
Okay.
After the Silver King, well, in 1939, that tractor that took off my thumb, the company, they lost the distribution of Silver King, so they took that tractor back. But my dad had a contract with Massey Harris and was selling them also, and he'd sold several Massey Harrises, and so I was wanting Dad to buy this and this farm with it was called a Massey 101 Junior. It was a narrow front tractor with a front cultivator and it was, I don't know, red and some other nice colored tractor. But he goes to the state fair. That was one thing. That was every year. That was his vacation. He goes to state fair.
Yeah, would have been.
And so 1939, he goes to state fair, and I was there too with him. And so here was a Ford tractor with the Ferguson system, 3-point hitch, and a whole lot of little gray tractors with these 3-point hitch on. And they didn't impress me very much. I mean, they wasn't very pretty or nothing, and they were different, and you kind of straddled them instead of setting up higher and all that. But Dad really took to them, and so he went and looked them all over and spent a lot of time there, did ask a lot of questions. Well, they were mostly distributing them through the car dealers. And so Dad inquired about it. Well, they'd offered to the Ford car dealers in Atlantic. So Dad went and asked him, and they said, no, we're not the least bit interested in it. And so then he found out who the distributor was. So one of the first days of 1940 in January, I went with Dad to Des Moines to the distributor place, whatever, and we go in there and he talks to him, and I sat out waiting for him, and he was in there. Oh, I don't know, it seemed to be like quite a long while. And when he came out, he says, "Well, we're Ford tractor dealers."
Yeah.
And so, but we were still on the farm, whatever, and Dad. I don't think his net worth was, I don't know, wasn't much above zero if it was ever. But he borrowed all the money from the Whitney Bank, and one of the deals to be a dealer, you had to buy and take a demonstrator. So we got our first Ford tractor plowing cultivator that he bought, and that spring 1940, we used it ourselves and sold 2 of them to neighbors around there. Well, then that winter, he sold 3 or 4 of them, and then during the time before we moved to Atlantic, he'd sold 75 of them.
Wow, unreal.
And so,
I didn't know that.
yeah, that was a story on the. So then, of course,
got for time.
which I had told you, we moved to, or he rented this building in December of 1944, while I was a senior in high school,
Down on Walnut Street.
down on Walnut Street, 504 Walnut. And it was a 50-foot wide building, and no parking or area for
Trade-ins.
trade-ins.
Yeah.
However, we
A
didn't
lot
really
of-
have trade-ins, and putting all the sales were replacing horses. And he traded for horses, but he'd sell them at a sale barn, or there were guys come around that would buy them, whatever. And so, then that's where we were until 1955, when Dad bought
This property out
property
here.
where we're at now,
Yep.
and built. Well, he actually bought it in '52, and we he put a Quonset building on it, and we used that for our warehouse and place to put our used machinery. So
Yep.
So he moved to town then in about 44, and you stayed on the farm then?
well, I graduated then in '45, spring of '45, and we were still on the farm. But Mom and Dad bought a house in Atlantic, and
Now, what year was that then?
that was '45.
Okay.
And so my oldest sister got married about that same time, but her husband immediately was drafted and went to service, and so we still had obligations to farm a farm that he had rented a couple miles away from our farm, and we had our own farm and our livestock and all that. So my oldest and, well, both my sisters, Rose and Helen, and we just stayed on the farm that summer, and I did the farming and whatever, and they both taught music to students around, whatever. And then come September, they each taught a country school. They were just two of them just about 2 miles apart. So we spent that whole summer, and during that summer, I had been going with my future wife Norma Jean a little bit, but I was so busy there in the spring and everything that I never paid much attention to her. She got to going with another guy, and so I was busy at the farm and hardly ever saw her, never thought much about it, and so first thing you know, come her birthday, her 18th birthday, which is in September, why all of a sudden they said, well, she was engaged to this guy. I said, what? So I go up to see her, and I says, well, what's the deal? Well, you know, I said, can we go, can I pick you up and we go out and talk? No, I can't do that. So I go back into my car, and guess what? It wouldn't start.
Perfect. Good timing.
What luck, huh?
Yeah.
So anyway, I went across the road and got the neighbor to come, and her dad wasn't home with her, and to give me a pull, get my car out of there. And so it went on till the next summer, and we'd gone to a church young people's meeting that spring, and so she and his boyfriend or whatever he was were there, and a bunch of us, and so I goes and talking with these, and so she kind of comes and talks to me, and so when we go to find a seat, why I go and sit down, she come right over and sat down beside me. And so this boyfriend, he come along, and she says, sit over there.
Wow.
So I thought, well, that,
That's a step in the right direction.
yeah, so I feel too bad about that. So anyway, I went down to, a few days after that, I went down to cultivate corn on the farm, because we were farming it that year of 46, but nobody was living there. We'd sold the livestock and stuff. I went down to cultivate corn, and so in the afternoon I was cultivating along, and I thought, I believe I'll just go up there and talk to her. So I goes up and come in the yard, and her dad was in the yard, and I says, is Norma Jean home? Yeah, she's in the house. And so I go knock on the door, she comes, and she's ironing, and her mom's gone. So I goes in the house, and I says, I don't know what I said, but anyhow, whether I could pick her up and we'd talk things over. And yeah, she said that'd be okay. So
Nice.
so then I guess the rest of it's history.
Yeah.
Kind of a coincidence, but the guy's and I now live in his former house.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Yeah.
But he and I were always good friends after that. We went fishing together and all
Yeah,
that. So
yeah, it's true.
So
He's a good guy.
there was never
Good guy.
any big fuss about it.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
real good about that, whatever.
Yeah.
And he married a nice gal, and he had a nice family.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
So anyway,
Well, why don't we, we've ran about another 20 minutes here, so why don't we kind of wrap things up and save something for
Sounds
the next
good.
episode. So, all right. Call it good here?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.